Rise and shine, ready or not, here we come. We have learned that we underestimate this virus at our own peril. This was the warning from the WHO director, who in January 2020, months before the pandemic was even declared, had boldly predicted that this would be the very first pandemic that would ever be resolved without pharmacological intervention. And now over 2 years have passed for a virus that has apparently fooled us before, according to Dr. Tony Fauci. A virus that Dr. Rochelle Walensky had said isn't stupid, and you look like an intelligent person. Hello, my name is Major Mike Webb, candidate for U.S. Congress, and as the name might suggest to the observant, I spent at least a little bit of time in uniformed military service. A job choice for which I never made any actual plan to become a career or a profession. I just woke up 20 years later and said, wow, I had a career. And apparently, like a novel coronavirus, there are some things in life that one can accomplish without ever developing a sentient thought because, perhaps like the comedian Woody Allen said, 80% of life is just showing up. But it is an empirical fact that of all commissioned lieutenants, regardless of whether they graduated from a service academy, participated in ROTC, or were selected to attend OCS, only 1% of those who begin that journey will ever pin on the starry flag level general officer. Reach for the stars all you want. Only 1% are going to get there. Only 5% from those who began on that journey of commissioned service, taking the oath, will attain the rank of full Colonel 06 as the most senior field grade officer. And if you can accomplish either of those without thinking a sentient thought, life is certainly good. Be like Hubble in the way we were. Life has come too easily. But according to Army Times, during normal times, when the Army is not building up or drawing down, it will strive for selection opportunities of 50% per colonel. That's 50% of those who are already at that prior level. 70% for lieutenant colonel, already at that level. 05. 80% for major 04. And 90% for captain 03. And for some, 90% is a selective institution. But 100% of commissioned butter bar second lieutenants will be promoted to first lieutenant, barring some obviously fatal flaw in character or death after only 18 months of time and grade to a mathematical certainty. It's kind of like jumping out of a plane, perfectly good airplane, and managing to hit the ground and not land on the moon. Avoiding becoming the distinguished honor grad from Army Jump School. And when you hit the rank of major, perhaps for the first time, very first time in your entire military career, especially for those who had never been assigned in special operations, the anecdote about looking to your left and looking to your right because one of you will be gone becomes very real, since only half of all commissioned company grade officers will cross that threshold to discard the railroad tracks of captain to become a junior field grade officer and pin on the gold oak leaf, which falls to 12% when you proceed further to reach for the silver oak leaf of a lieutenant colonel, with an opportunity for battalion command. A lot of people will tell you that, networking and mentoring helps. It just happens to be a fact that of that 1% that make flag level officer, they somehow manage to acquire quite a few general level officer friends and tokens speed your trip. Whether you are an officer or in the enlisted ranks, there is at the Department of the Army a branch manager that can assist a soldier in making some choices for their careers. I've only met a few soldiers who were always on the phone with branch, and I guess it happened to work for them because they somehow were able to get jobs. But your branch manager can help you in terms of assignments, duty stations, education to prepare for promotion boards. And at the unit level in the battalion, there is probably at least one personnel officer to remind a lieutenant about updating officer record briefs, completing officer evaluation support forms, other administrative tasks to ensure a lieutenant doesn't blow that 90% chance to be promoted to the rank of captain. Some still do it, somehow. Some officers don't know that one day you're walking around the gym and nobody's going to come to you like they did to Forrest Gump and tell them that their contract is up. You actually have to put in paperwork when you're an officer to get out of the Army. And some officers take a little time to find that out. So they spend a little bit more time than they wanted to on active duty or in the military. Do you want that guy in charge of anything? Probably not. So it might behoove someone in command to help that soldier find his way. You may happen to locate a recommended reading list as a lieutenant, maybe an OBC, including books like Mask of Command, Company Command, or Command FC, which seems to indicate that command, stomp, stomp, foot, foot might be somewhat important for your career progression. Even if you don't like to be in charge. It shows a funny profession if you are in the military as an officer. And at some point, even if not often, you will probably participate in some activity focused upon officer professional development. Maybe go on a staff ride, go out to see a battlefield, go to a museum. But if there is one consistent piece of advice that every young and rising officer will receive with no exception, it is that if you know the rules for promotion, like don't make your boss angry with you so he gives you a bad evaluation, you will have a far more successful career. So, at least in the military, and don't play with the hand grenade too much. So, at least in the military, the expert seems to suggest that there is a reward for doing homework, especially when it comes to the survival of your career, and for some that provide sufficient evolutionary pressure to do the right thing. But I wasn't just an officer, I was an intelligence officer, and when you're branched in intelligence, we are often tasked to think like the enemy or opposing force. And it would just reasonably seem to me that if you had just a little bit of patience and were determined to ruin a young officer's military career, the easiest thing that you could do would be to provide him bad advice and or just keep him in the dark about the things that he needs to know. Out of sight and out of mind. They don't know what they don't know, and they're not going to be looking for something if they don't know that it exists. And so, boys and girls, this is why Sun Tzu, in his book, The Art of War, which may be one of those books on the Officer Professional Development Recommended Reading List, hint, hint, this may be on the final exam, says that all warfare is based upon deception. And if you have an invisible enemy, get on the horn to Cape Canaveral, because Houston, we have a problem. And just as the job of intelligence and military operations is to attempt to discover and discern the plans and intentions and capabilities of an adversary, so as to make that invisible enemy more visible with a developed threat picture, trying to locate that unidentified flying object early on the sensors on your HUD display, so as to make a command decision for remedial action that is reasonably calculated to eliminate the threat or risk or danger. The job of counterintelligence is to develop measures to deny information to your adversaries. Bruises and feints, decoys, giving rise to application of rules based upon deception. Like Sun Tzu's recommendation to appear small to your enemy when your force is actually very large, or to appear large when your force is actually very small, so that even if your adversaries happen to pick up your presence on their sensors, multiple sensors even, perhaps, you remain as long as possible that unexplained aerial phenomenon, causing confusion and ambiguity, which can only accrue to your advantage and to the detriment of your adversary. It's not exactly rocket science, and we have learned that we underestimate this virus to our own peril. You may or may not know that biological warfare is the oldest weapon of mass destruction, dating back to the days of the Assyrians, BC. And it is an optimal choice because it provides the opportunity for a first strike attack, with the battlefield multiplier of exploiting the most important principle of warfare: surprise. If your adversaries believe that they are dealing with an act of God or freak occurrence in nature, they will not be looking for you, providing you a free range of maneuver, as long as they are in the dark. And in battle, just as fortune favors the bold, it is always to your advantage to maintain the initiative and to control the flow of battle in a military operation. And who in the military does not love to be in command, especially in that ordered chaos of war that some are convinced is just hell. In the military, particularly in the training environment, TRADOC, Training Induction Command, we have what are known as training objectives, what we describe as battle-focused training. These training objectives are probably tied to your mission essential task list or METAL. And as a part of your points of instruction, or POI, as a leader, you will probably pause to review those training objectives for your troops through some practical exercises or test, if only to be able to include in your quarterly training brief, or QTB, to inform your superior commander or rater that he or she can be satisfied with your performance, your superior performance. Because some quantifiable percentage of the soldiers under your charge or command have attained some quantifiable measure of proficiency as a demonstration of your superior leadership skills, which can only accrue to your professional advantage and benefit in the form of promotions and opportunities for other career-enhancing assignments, distinguishing you from those others who began in the military at the very same point as you in some commissioning program with the same opportunities, who took the same oath but failed in a natural selection of choices to take advantage of opportunities to avoid adverse outcomes. And in pandemic, Dr. Walensky has observed that human choices have not served many well, as is often the case. But you look like a winner and an intelligent person. So here's your golden opportunity to demonstrate your mastery of the material in this comprehensive pandemic final exam. Here is a simple fact pattern, a methodology often employed in law school final comprehensive exams. Given you have been assigned as a strategic counterintelligence analyst and an emerging public health crisis has been reported in the central mainland of China involving a febrile infection arising from a pneumonia of unknown etiology that has been found in only 15 vendors in a wholesale wet market that measures the size of 9 American football fields in the largest city in the central mainland of China, the 42nd largest city in the world, with no fatalities reported until January 10, 2020, the very first fatality. And Chinese public health officials have reported that they have found no evidence of an infectious disease being transmitted from person to person. Do you wake the president? Based upon the known information by January 14, 2020, with only 41 known cases in China, 27 of which by that time had been connected to the wet market, and 1 reported case in Thailand. Do you find credible the threat assessment that there is no evidence of an infectious virus? What standard metric in epidemiology would assist you in making that informed decision? On February 24th, 2020, 4 days after the first reported fatality in the United States from a novel coronavirus, and almost a month after a declaration of a public health emergency of international concern, or PHEIC, there were over 75,000 cases in China, and 1,800 teams of at least 5 epidemiologists have examined 55,924 laboratory-confirmed cases and properly their trace contacts, but found only a less than 5% secondary attack rate, 4 times too low to validate the presence of a disease being transmitted from person to person, and 12 times too low to set off a super spreader event, prompting the conclusion in a 40-page report that it is not clear whether this correlates with the presence of an infectious virus. That report indicates that the elderly in nursing homes represent the highest fatality risk, that there were no outbreaks associated with large social gatherings, that infections clusters appear to be driven by families, primarily farming families in the 7th largest city in China, who happen to be the political opposition in a transitioning economy in the Detroit of China, and that there appears to be no evidence of wider community spread. Using the science, do you accept the secondary attack rate of less than 5% or rely upon the projected reproductive number, or R-Naught, of 2 to 2.5? What if that finding is validated in the largest sample size trace context study to date, over 3 million cases in India, finding a secondary attack rate of 4.6%? As an intelligence analyst, you know that the pandemics are historically associated with fear, confusion, and despair. You know that viruses are the most abundant biological particles in the world, and that before this novel coronavirus, there had been only a total of 219 harmful to mankind, making a virus the least likely emerging biological threat. And you become aware that in February 2020, Wei Ji and others had examined the code and usage bias for the genome in an attempt to discover the zoonotic source. Still elusive, based upon animals that were sold in the wet market, where only 27 vendors had been infected, and that report indicates that this novel coronavirus has a codon usage bias for snakes, even though coronaviruses only infect mammals and birds. Using the science, you continue to pursue a still elusive zoonotic origin source. By December 2020, with over 319,000 American fatalities, over 75% of whom are the elderly, a known high fatality risk from the beginning, you become aware that not even one scientist in the world had validated causation through Koch's postulates, a method that epidemiologists had employed since 1870, and that only a few trace contact studies had even been performed to validate the secondary attack rate. And what few that had been done was small sample size household studies, which reported a wide range of secondary attack rates, from 0.46% to as high as 63.87%. And 13 large sample size trace contact studies reporting a variable secondary attack rate between 4.6% and 49.56%, too low to validate the presence of a highly contagious pathogen, but all confirming the tendency of outbreaks to occur amongst families. A high fatality risk for the elderly, and no evidence of wider community spread. Using the science, you continue to describe the invisible enemy as a highly contagious disease. Prior to the emergence of the Delta variant, there were very few trace contact studies to determine its secondary attack rate, practically operating in the blind and against an invisible enemy. And upon the emergence of the Delta variant of concern, while there was much discussion about R-Naught, a rejected rate by the CDC prior to a pandemic, there were practically no trace contact studies to determine secondary attack rate. However, in April of this year, a study of all cases reported amongst residents of Norway, a very large sample size study for infections arising between December 1st, 2021 and January 8th, 2022 had determined that the secondary attack rate for the Delta variant of concern that had been identified by Dr. Walensky as the most contagious virus she had ever seen in 20 years of medical practice had only a secondary attack rate of 19.4%, just still 0.6% too low to validate the disease being transmitted from person to person, much less a highly contagious disease capable of a super spreader event, which requires a threshold of 60% secondary attack rate, while they found a secondary attack rate of 25.1% for the Omicron variant of concern, which would satisfy the threshold for only a contagious, but not a highly contagious disease. So, as an intelligence analyst, what do you do with this information? This briefing is unclassified. As you were, my name is Major Mike Webb. By God, I am running for U.S. Congress. This time, make the right choice, and we shall make America great again. Honest. Carry on. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb. Honest.